Welcome, everyone, to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. I'm Justin, your host, and today I'm joined by Victor from iVPN to discuss virtual private network services. But before we start, a quick word from our sponsor. The Australian Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by hardblock.com.au. Hardblock is Australia's oldest Bitcoin-only exchange. They have no added fees and are optimized for dollar cost averaging. Sign up to Hardblock today using the discount link in the description below to receive free auto-send batch Bitcoin withdrawals for 6 months. All right, Victor, how's it going?
Doing very well. Hello, Justin. How about you?
I'm good as well. Thanks for taking the time. You're just kicking off your day, and I'm starting to wind mine down. So I appreciate the time, and it's good to chat a little bit about privacy, VPNs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
And just for anyone listening, as a bit of a disclaimer, this is not a sponsored episode or anything like that. I've got a bit of a personal bias. So I'm a iVPN customer, and I have been for a few years now. And I've actually learned quite a lot from iVPN's guides. So I do have a bit of a bias, but it's just good to put it out there that this is not some sort of like sponsored or paid advertisement or something like that. This is very much just like a kind of a casual and open conversation about things like VPNs and particularly the offerings that iVPN has. So with that in mind, why don't, for the listeners, you maybe just introduce yourself briefly in terms of what you do at iVPN, and perhaps even go into a little bit about iVPN's history and mission.
Sure. Yeah. So iVPN, I will start with the service part. So iVPN is a privacy-focused commercial VPN service. It's been around for more than 10 years, and it was founded in 2009 by a gentleman called Nicolas Pastel. He's still the CEO of the company. He's active in the company, and he has started this because he was really concerned about the proliferation of data collection and an increased need for protection for individuals against those different ways of tracking people. And specifically, as we'll probably get into it a little bit deeper, but commercial VPN services, in our view, are the best to solve the ISP problem, as we call it, because the ISPs have a very wide view on who we are, what we do, and they have very many different data points that they can connect to create a very useful profile for us. So Nick back then saw the need for this, but the actual need and this boom in the need for VPN services have increased after the Snowden revelations. So many things back then were like a little bit in the tinfoil hat territory, like, okay, so are they really working with governments? Are they really tracking us? What's happening? There's no way that this many data points are just collected and stored and like analyzed. This just wouldn't be happening. And then it turned out that many of those assumptions are true. So there was a big boom, and iVPN has started to grow. Nick has started to hire people, grow the team, but we have always been like a very much long-term focus, slow growth type of company. And this is where there's clear distinction between us and other companies, that we are pretty much focused on the mission, pretty much focused on all the different ethical considerations and different things that we set out for ourselves. And for this reason, we are still a relatively small company, but we are okay with that. We are looking at long-term growth in terms of hiring and product decisions and different other aspects. So yeah, a little bit of a long introduction to the iVPN. But yeah, and about my role, my official title is head of communications, but I wear many hats. So as we are a relatively small team, I've been with the company for more than 4 years. Originally, I was hired as a marketer, and my background is actually in marketing, but I never really liked that kind of titles, and I'm really disillusioned with the state of marketing. So I'm doing a lot of different stuff, mostly on the non-technical side, and wearing many hats, helping out Nick with the different areas, mostly research, writing, social media, dealing with community stuff, and just really working on signaling our values and improvements instead of this whole push marketing that's really relevant in the industry. So that's about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Marketing has a very kind of contrived, or at least in my perception has a very contrived kind of nature to it, doesn't it? Like you're trying to sell
Yeah,
something. I mean, if you called it sales,
yeah,
that would put most people off, but we call it marketing instead, and it's a nice, nice synonym, but it pretty much means the same thing. But I think
yeah,
education and signaling values is much more. It's a long-term focus. It's a more genuine focus, and I think people, as they kind of wake up to sales and marketing and even things like privacy, they appreciate that a lot more. And that's, I mean, we have a very similar or a parallel kind of trajectory, I guess, in terms of Hardblock, the exchange that I work for that sponsors this podcast. Very small team. We're all kind of jacks of all trades. I was hired more or less to do education, which I guess is partly marketing, but at the same time, it's not focused on necessarily trying to always drive more customers. It's trying to say, how do we
yep,
upskill the clients that we have? How do we upskill other people as well so that is broadly aware of some of these things? Because, yeah, you're right. The invasion in privacy of privacy is becoming so blatant nowadays. Like back at the Snowden revelations, that's when it was still a bit of a like a mystery. Like, is this actually happening, or is this just a conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat sort of scenario? But
yep,
then there's so many data points that would lead you to conclude that yes, there does seem to be this dragnet surveillance. They do seem to be doing things in warrantless or permissionless ways sometimes. Whereas nowadays, I think that's just completely blatant. there is no hiding of that anymore. You know, in Australia, we have very much a surveillance country. We have metadata retention laws. We have, key
yep,
disclosure laws. We have all sorts of things that really are a great erosion of our privacy. We even have this kind of like intervene and disrupt, where basically police are allowed to, without a warrant, get access to things like your social media account or your online
yeah,
accounts, impersonate you, change data if they think that it could perhaps, I guess, entrap a criminal. And that's never been done before in Australia. I don't think that's been done in many developed countries, where they can kind of commandeer your information and then modify it and transmit it as if it were coming from you. But now that's allowed to happen, and there is no like tension with the legal system that's trying to stop that happening. It can go through the request to do that from police through an internal administrative area, which is obviously not laden with checks and balances.
yeah. I mean, I'm just Australia as a jurisdiction is pretty far away from me. I have friends there, and I've been hearing some stories from them, and I've been just big because we are recording this episode. I've done like a quick research specifically on data retention laws. I was really interested because I'm doing research right now on ISPs, specifically in the US and the EU. How much they are allowed to log, how much they need to log, what kind of data they have to keep, and I was just amazed by Australia. Is compared to the EU and the US, I didn't think it's possible to have worse conditions than in the US, but it seems like you guys over there have that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that doesn't sound too good. But yeah, that ties really much into the main need for VPNs, I think. Yeah.
Exactly right. And because it's a slippery slope and it doesn't seem to go backwards. Like it's very rare that you have a government say, you know what, we're going to undo some of these regulations. We're going to undo some of these, surveillance mechanisms that we have. It only
Yeah.
ever gradually creeps forward. And so being able to, rather than, wait or expect a change, is to try to protect yourself in other ways. And I guess, yeah, that's exactly where a VPN comes in, at least for some of the problems, because it doesn't solve everything, even though
Yeah.
sometimes marketing will say that it solves everything.
Yeah.
So that could
Yeah,
be a
just
good segue. Oh,
just
sorry, you
before
go.
we just before we get into that, like this, you mentioned the slippery slope thing. That's one of the key things for me, or why I'm really interested in the question of privacy, and why I've been really motivated to just get into this space. And the more and more I've learned about it, I'm more and more happy I've become to be able to do research, do education, and like work on a tool to help prevent this, because the biggest, most fearful, and most appalling scenario for me is just really what we've been seeing happening in China, for example. So you can see that with the where we are with the technological capabilities. You just have to pair that with willingness, and just like a very loose, maybe regulatory environment, or with like a very authoritarian country with like top-down control where anything is possible, which is decided by maybe one person. If you couple these, the possibilities to really practically track down people, label people however you want for whatever reason that you want, and just basically put them into detention camps or even worse. It's just like it's like a very real scenario, and it's happening right now. So for me, that kind of example, I think there is a possibility that it might happen in countries that we see as like democratic. So with all that data that is being all these capabilities that you've been talking about in Australia, and all that data, if it's not rolled back, all it takes is just like one change, one wave of maybe populism or some sort of even bigger scandal. I'm looking for the word, crisis that might help someone with like very radical views get elected, and they can use all these capabilities and all this data to do whatever they want with it. So that's really scary for me, and I would like to stop that.
Absolutely. And there's countless examples throughout history, and probably countless examples happening right now as well, of exactly that occurring, isn't it? Or aren't there? And a lot of people see things like privacy, and I mean, it's very cliche, but they'll say things like, I don't really have anything to hide, or surely, having a little bit less privacy is good because we get to get the bad guys. And it's like, well, whose definition of bad guys are we going with? And what's the definition of bad guys in future? And what's not a crime now could be a crime in future. And there's all those sort of things where I don't think people always extrapolate out a little bit further, or look at perhaps not even the worst case scenario, but getting closer to a worst case scenario. But the unfortunate part is that, we seem to kind of converge on those points in history, in human history, just over and over and over again. So it makes sense to pay attention to it before it gets too late.
Yeah, I agree.
So what would be some of the benefits of people using a VPN generally, in terms of like what it does protect you from and what it doesn't protect you from?
Yeah, so as we've talked about it a little bit briefly, so I think specifically a VPN like ours, a privacy-focused VPN, it should be designed, and it is designed to protect you from dragnet mass surveillance. And one specific aspect of that is what your ISP sees about you and knows about you. So the problem here is that ISPs, specifically in the US, but as we've talked about it in Australia as well, they have different incentives to monitor, log, and share your browsing history, and which are very valuable for them as advertisers and upselling different stuff. Data brokers, so they might package all this different information and share all these data points with data brokers who acquire data about you from other sources as well, and collate that, and they package it further and sell it further. So it goes on and on, and governments as well. So with the data retention laws, some of them are not very clear how the different processes work in regards to getting information, subpoenaing information, and getting different data points and history about you. But generally, all this information is available to a large number of parties. And ideally, if you're concerned about all the stuff that we've been talking about, and if you're concerned about who can see what's about my browsing history. So what we're talking about on the ISP level. So there's one caveat here that more and more of our internet traffic is encrypted now with the HTTPS. So that's the little, if you go on a website and there's a little padlock, in the address bar. That means that your ISP has limited information about what you do on that website. So they might be able to see some of the DNS requests, which will tell them what sites you visit, but not actually all the information about what you do there. So the situation in this regard is improving somewhat with these technological developments and with the browsers implementing more and more safeguards. But the ISPs still see a lot about what you do online. So that's a good VPN, a trustworthy VPN can help you do that by encrypting your traffic between the device and the VPN server. And your ISP sits between those 2 points. So they won't be able to see, they will just see like an encrypted data flow. So they won't be able to analyze what's going on there. So that's the gist of it. There are many different caveats. I'm not sure about which direction shall we go into that. Different use cases or limitations, or some other benefits of the VPNs.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good, just broad summary as it is that it's protecting you from that dragnet surveillance from your ISP. My understanding would be that they can see that you're connecting to a server, whether it's, you choose an Australian server or an international server. And I guess to some degree, there would probably be some obvious listings of like which servers are VPNs and iVPN, would sort of fall in that. So an ISP might know that you're connecting to a VPN. They might even know that you're
That's
connecting
correct.
to an iVPN VPN server, but they don't get to see that traffic. They don't get to see the websites you're going to or any unencrypted data that's being sent. Although, like you say, most data is encrypted nowadays because of the HTTPS, the little padlock symbol. I guess another use case or scenario is if people are ever using public Wi-Fi to be able to then encrypt the data over that public Wi-Fi, because the downside of public Wi-Fi is that anyone else on that Wi-Fi network is able to more or less see that data, especially if it's in a wireless fashion. So having something like a VPN provides you that level of privacy from other people, even just on the network being able to snoop it, as well as, of course, whoever's running that wireless hotspot that you're connecting
Yep,
to.
exactly. Yeah, I mean that's I would say from privacy perspective, the second part is what would be concerning to me, especially the incentives and the motivations are there to log it, mine it, maybe sell it. But in terms of other people on that network, yeah. So this specific thing called person in the middle attacks. So that's what let's say hacker could like see the traffic that you are generating on that Wi-Fi. It's much easier to do that on an unsecured Wi-Fi than on the one that you at your home, on one that you would trust. So in those cases, I would definitely airports, hotels, universities, wherever you don't trust the operator, don't know the operator, or there is not enough safeguards put in place. Maybe it's there is no password, on the Wi-Fi. In those cases, I personally always use a VPN. So yeah, that's a good point.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there any things kind of on your mind that a VPN doesn't protect you from that people often think that it does?
Yeah, sure. That's a very long list. But yeah, if you
That's
just
where marketing comes into it, doesn't it? Well, a lot of other VPN providers, I feel like once you have a VPN, you're completely secure and protected online. No one will ever know anything about you. You think, there's a bit more nuance to it than that, though.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the part when I said like when I joined iVPN, where I've started to work. So my mandate was really about trying to raise awareness about the service, trying to position it somehow, and to because I've seen and I've come to know after learning more about the whole landscape of the industry and the different VPN services that we have a very technically very sound, very well designed and very very good service. But not many people know about it. And there are hundreds of different VPN services. It's a very competitive market. So I was analyzing all the different ways that you can do that. So like Facebook ads, Google ads, email marketing, different sponsorships, YouTube sponsorships, all this kind of stuff. And the more and more I've learned about this industry, it was an easy more. So this call became easier that we don't want to go down this path. This is just not the Nick, the CEO, has very strong values in this regard. I myself changed a lot, let's say in the past 5 years, and I really don't. I wouldn't be comfortable with doing all this type of data collection and profiling and using that for marketing. But yeah, what's baffling for me really is that the biggest VPN companies, because of the competition and because of how the whole modern marketing works, they are doing all that privacy violating stuff that other companies are doing to sell privacy. And I can understand that to some extent, because there's an argument that could be made that we are going to people in finding them in privacy violating ways, so we can tell them that they need more privacy and they are in danger because of this. On the other hand, I don't really get that argument, because what you are doing is essentially just like participating in that game and feeding that with data and with money. You are feeding that whole system to stay effective and improve. and you just enable it. You just put a stamp on it. Okay, this is how things work. This is how they should keep on working, and we are happy with that because we can get new customers. So if you're listening to this and you are using one of the big names in the VPNs, they are most likely using third-party trackers on their website. They're most likely using Google Analytics to track you, which passes information on to Google. They're most likely advertising on Facebook and Google and YouTube, and they use all these tools. Sorry, we might be steering away a little bit from your question, but I'm just really, this is a pet peeve of mine that I really cannot accept, and that this just really
I know. I think
pisses me off, to be honest. Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile saying, yeah, because it's that slippery slope, isn't it? Because they're saying, oh, we're doing this for white hat hacker reasons, like we've compromised your privacy only to let you know that we've compromised your privacy so you can improve your privacy. But where does that line end? Who knows who is in charge at a later point to say, like, actually we can push that line a little bit further. Like, let's make this really drive the point really home to people, and let's I don't know, let's release some of their private details to really prove the point, or let's, you never know where that actually ends up. Or even to say, oh, look, we've decided to use some of your data because, we've collected it in a pretty much legal way. Like, just opens the door to a lot of things. And rather than doing that, actually just focusing on things like education and research and understanding things better and helping clients understand things better, it just makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point.
So are there, I guess, any main things that you think it's good to discuss that VPNs don't provide for? I might be able to throw one out there, which is around anonymity, because that gets mixed up a lot with privacy. And I mean, the way that I look at it, there might be better definitions than this, is that I see, say, privacy as people might know who you are, but they don't necessarily know what you're doing. So it's kind of like having curtains in your house. They know where they know where your house is. They might even know that you live there, but they can't actually see into your house and see what you're doing. And it's kind of similar to a VPN in a lot of ways. It can keep you private, but your ISP still knows who you are. Your ISP knows that you're connecting to a VPN server even, but at the same time, they don't see what you're doing. Anonymity, on the other hand, is something kind of quite the opposite, where they can see what you're doing, but they don't know who you are. And you're often obfuscated or like hidden within a crowd where you could be any one of those people, but it's kind of clear what you're doing. But I guess how does a VPN and anonymity come into it? Especially people think that being on a VPN means that no one knows who I am or what I'm doing.
Yeah, I really like your definition on this and that example that illustrates this distinction very well. Yeah, for VPNs, I think this is one of the most damaging claims that big VPN providers, many of them do, is claiming that you can become anonymous with VPNs. And I think there is a very, if you take really Occam's razor, there's no bad intentions behind them. The easiest explanation is that this is what sells the product, and SEO. So people search for anonymous VPNs. So like the VPN providers and the marketing teams, they feel obliged, to harvest that need and tell them that, yeah, sure, if you want anonymity from VPNs, we can get give it to you. But that's just not how it works. And that's, for me, it's really damaging, because if you with like false education and these promises, you can provide a false sense of security, and if people start using your product in a way that they expect that it will work, but it doesn't provide that benefit, that can be the most harmful in different scenarios. So, for example, let's say someone wants to stay anonymous because they have been subject to identity theft, or they have like an abusive ex that tries to track them down. In those cases, if you say that, okay, VPNs make you anonymous, they will expect that they will just like be able to keep doing what they are doing, even go on social media and post about it and say, okay, the VPN is protecting me, and that's not going to be the case, and they will face very heavy consequences. So just going into a little bit to the final points. So yeah, so the for anonymity, the issue is that VPNs, they just generally do the encryption part that we've been talking about. The traffic is encrypted between your device and the VPN server, but then from the VPN server, it exits to the internet unencrypted. So that just means that there are different ways to track your requests. And specifically, for example, to the websites that you connect to, your IP will be changed. But whatever information that you put there, it's going to be tied to your identity. So if you have an account there, for example, best example is social media, but any type of different service that you use, if you provide your email address, if you provide your name, if you provide any other personal identifiable information, they will be able to connect that and collect that. Maybe not to your personal IP address, but whatever you do there is going to be connected to that personal information, and that immediately can de-anonymize you. And there are many other ways to track you across maybe your devices, maybe different websites. One example is third-party tracking through tracking cookies. So Facebook and Google, so Google's main ways to track you across websites is Google Analytics and also their ad network. But Facebook is the best example with tracking cookies. Their whole play about using Facebook logins, for example. Whenever a website uses Facebook accounts for logins, they place a code snippet on that website, and that code snippet right now is present on many websites. So what happens is that if you have a Facebook account, Facebook knows a lot about you already, but as you go across different websites, they will know that you visited that website, and they know about many of the actions that you take there through these different tools and snippets and trackers that they place there. So I just wanted to bring this example here because these type of things immediately can de-anonymize you to different parties, for example, to Facebook. So it just illustrates that like VPNs do a very important but limited job. It's just a part of a toolkit that you have to employ, and then you need a lot more to even attempt to stay anonymous. But I usually stress that I think there is no zero privacy and there is no total privacy. Just like that, there is no zero anonymity and there is no total anonymity. If we take a threat model where you are, the most well-resourced, biggest government names are after you, and they have a targeted attempt to anonymize you. There is no tool on earth that will protect your anonymity. So I'm just trying to illustrate here that it's always a spectrum. But VPNs generally, just going back to the original question, VPNs will definitely won't help you get anonymity alone. So I would advise using Tor for anonymity if that's your goal. It's going to be a better tool for that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion. And there's also, I'll link to them, in fact, a couple of more advanced guides on iVPN's site. I think it's Miramir. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Yeah,
Miramir. It talks about like nested VPNs and running Tor in conjunction with VPNs. And so people who have probably a more extreme threat model, and he even talks about, I'm pretty sure it's one of his guides, about threat modeling and trying to determine like what kind of tools might you need depending on your threat model. I think that's a really good rabbit hole for people to go down because there's some useful information in there. I think probably for the majority of users listening, there's probably going to be some of those main points that you hit on in terms of it's going to help provide a level of privacy from your ISP, from that dragnet surveillance that they do. So they might see, that you're logging in to a server that's a VPN, but they just don't get to see what you're actually querying, like what websites you're going to. You mentioned also like the man-in-the-middle attack. If you're on like a public Wi-Fi, either from another user on that Wi-Fi or from the Wi-Fi provider themselves. And I guess another one that we haven't talked a lot about, but it's sort of inherent in there as well. I think this is why a lot of people get a VPN to begin with, is like geolocation and censorship and trying to bypass that. I think a lot of people probably learnt about VPNs when Netflix was only available in America and not Australia, and people would just log into their American friend's account from Australia using a VPN that says they're from an American server or something. Not to endorse that or say to do that, but just kind of comically, that's probably how a lot of people were switched on to the benefits of VPNs in terms of that, geolocation, censorship stuff as well. And so I think that's probably the main stuff that people will get a benefit out of. But you bring up a couple of good points. Sorry, you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to add to that, like this is where it gets a little bit murky for us as well as service providers. So we obviously try to analyze, not by logging and tracking, but by getting our finger on the pulse, in communities, monitoring discussions about VPNs and talking to customers, how they use it, what kind of needs they have. And generally, if your main use case or need for VPN is to watch US Netflix or NFL or that type of stuff, iVPN is not going to be the best pick for you, because there are other providers who do that much better. But so iVPN was not designed for this purpose, and we don't specifically support this use case. And that there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that it's just resources. It takes resources, developers, costs, to support these cases, and we would rather prioritize things on our roadmap that helps the privacy use cases. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is that to solve this Netflix problem, for example, so to get around and trick Netflix, let's say, as a provider, the easiest and the most obvious way to do that is to use so-called residential proxies, where you work with a third party, and they provide ways for you to connect to gateways, let's say, that are sourced in different ways, that perhaps through malware and perhaps through ways that the actual person that this traffic goes through their device, they might not even know about that. So your traffic, if you use if you use a different VPN service for this, who use these residential proxies, your traffic goes to the VPN server and then goes through the residential proxy. So Netflix, are not able to identify that it's a VPN, and then it goes through the Netflix servers, and that's how they serve that. So there are different liability problems and different ethical considerations there that we might not be able to get through those hurdles, and we rather not rely on those solutions. There are other solutions, and we are trying to explore them a little bit. But it's important that privacy-focused VPNs, and there are some others out there, and iVPN might not be the best choice for you, but you will see if you do the research, most of the privacy-focused providers don't cater to this use case. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use VPNs for this use case, but you have to be wary that those providers who focus on this are usually not best for privacy.
Gotcha.
And a very important distinction here is that, or very important point here is that all your traffic, if you use a VPN, all your traffic and everything you do is going to go through the VPN. So essentially, you shift the trust from your ISP to the VPN. Even if you just use the VPN for censorship circumvention or geo unblocking, even then the VPN provider will be able to see everything if the VPN is on. So if you just use it only for Netflix, then they will be able to see the traffic going to Netflix. But there's always background chatter, and there's always different ways that they can use that traffic. So that's what I would stress, that if you that's an important consideration for me. And on the censorship side, just go ahead if you have anything to add. Sorry.
Oh, no, it was just going to say that I think it makes sense that VPNs that are more accustomed to logging into things like Netflix and circumventing that geo-restriction, the fact that they're using those residential proxies, I'm guessing is because Netflix and Amazon and whatever else are probably very good at now blacklisting VPN services and just saying you can't use the service that looks like you're using a VPN, and therefore those other VPN providers are putting you through another proxy afterwards. But I guess there's probably an additional level of trust there as well, and then they're not the most privacy preserving VPNs. It's just more so to bypass that geo restriction. At least that's my understanding.
That's a good assessment. I agree.
And you were going to talk a bit about censorship.
Just to round off on the use cases for VPNs. So getting around specifically censorship in countries where they just block different websites, different services. That's a big use case. That we see a big need in different countries that are under heavy censorship. Iran, Venezuela, Pakistan, different countries. So it's interesting because that problem is solved by Tor much better. There are some issues with Tor. It's not hard to block, but they're working very hard on that to provide different obfuscation tools. And the other thing, it's slow, but I think it's also getting better. I haven't done some tests lately, and it might be more problematic or slower if you connect in Iran, for example. So this use case, I think it's solved much better by Tor. But what we have seen, I've done some analysis on this, and what we have seen is that the awareness on the existence of tool like VPN, it beats Tor. So the searches for free VPN, at least to the extent that you get the data from places like Iran, is at least the twice for the need like Tor. And the reason for this is just like the whole VPN thing is just so mainstream now, and people understand that it's perhaps easier to download an app on your mobile and just press one button and that's solved. Using Tor, it requires a little bit more jumping through more hoops. It's much easier on desktop, for example. So so the need is there. But there's one important thing here is that people in those jurisdictions and those areas want free VPNs, and that's where the trust part comes in. Again, that for example in Iran and different places, most people use cheaper Android phones, and the biggest free VPNs that are installed on Android phones based on the data available. Millions of installs are by Chinese companies with no clear business case. There's maybe there's a paid version of that, but no, like most people are not going to pay for that in Iran. So the question is, what's the play
model?
there? What's the profit model? And of course, there's not going to be. I'm not going to accuse anyone here, and there's not. There's no proof for this, but it's not hard to make the case to okay, so it's probably scooped up by some government entities, and they're using their position to subsidize these companies and get all that data for different purposes. So this is where the trust comes in. It's interesting that people try to use VPNs for getting around censorship as well. As for iVPN, we don't specifically focus on this use case, but we do offer OBFS proxy and right now, which helps in some circumstances, and we are exploring different ways, because for iVPN customers, we would like to give them the option, because if you use iVPN for privacy, if you cannot connect to the service because of different censorships and different blocks on a country level, like country firewalls, then you won't be able to use the service for privacy, and if you pay for it. So we would like to focus on solving that issue for our customers, not like a larger user base. We understand that need, but it's just it's a big thing to solve. So we have a lane, and we are kind of sticking in it, let's say. So
you have to remain focused, I think. Otherwise, you end up sort of chasing our tails, trying to do everything.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I guess I've got something to go back to briefly, and then perhaps we'll even move on to focus more on that trust, like the fact that people, by going with a VPN, they're kind of shifting the trust model to the VPN. It's good to maybe talk a little bit about how would you choose a good VPN, or what makes iVPN stand out as a good party to trust. But before we do that, I wanted to go back just a couple of steps. You were mentioning around if people are using a VPN, it doesn't make them anonymous by default, especially if they're using things like a login to a website where they're provided like their phone number, their email address, their personal ID, their home address, whatever it might be. And you also mentioned cookies. So the fact that can track you across various websites, and even just track you when you come back to that same website, regardless of whether the VPN says you're coming from the same location or not. Those, I think, are really good points for people to kind of like hone in on and know, like, again, what a VPN can protect you from and what it can't. Now, the one that really creeps me out as well is browser fingerprinting, which I think even less people are aware of compared to like cookies or using their names and whatever else. And the fact that when you go to a website, there's actually a really good one called Panopticon Click or Panoptic Click. I'll find it and I'll link it in the show notes. But you can go there and say, scan my browser and let me know in what portion of people can you kind of identify me. And it will use a lot of things from your browser, like the screen resolution, the kind of like graphics card, your time zone, There's a bunch of things that it basically uses to profile and says, all right, well, based on all these details, we can kind of pick you one out of 50 people of the last 300,000 people that have used this website. So it's very, 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 very specific, basically. And even if you're using a VPN and it looks like you're coming from a different geolocation, if anyone has a profile of what your browser looks like, it's going to be very obvious that it's you coming back just from a different IP. One way around that is to use something like Tor browser, which actually specifically has mitigation for that, or things like LibreWolf as another type of browser, or even just being aware of it. Again, knowing that the VPN is not actually making me anonymous. I'm going to a website that can fingerprint my browser and see my time zone or the graphics card that my computer's running, and therefore that's very, very unique to me. So just other things to keep in mind, and also very creepy, the amount of level that we're going to in terms of trying to identify people through all these really underhanded ways, I guess. Not asking people, who are you? Tell me who you are. It's like, I'm going to try to find out who you are regardless of who you tell me who you are. I guess that was probably the main point that I had on that, which is just to sort of throw that one out there.
Yeah, just to add one point to this is that you mentioned Tor browser. I think they're doing things there to improve on this aspect a lot. But if you're not using Tor, you just use regular browser and your VPN on. If you try to, that's the very tricky thing about browser fingerprinting, is that whatever measures you are trying to take, install different extensions or try to protect yourself against from this, that's usually just makes you more unique. So it just like turns the problem around, which is very just like this is the point where you go deeper and you say, okay, I just give up. I just give up.
Right.
Just like there's no way to protect yourself against. But this is where going back to my point that there's no zero privacy and there is no total privacy. What I would just suggest to people is like try to do enough. Try to understand as we talked about threat models. What are you concerned about? What kind of outcomes you're concerned about? What kind of data points you're concerned about? Just try to do an assessment on that and who might be getting that data. Your search engine, your social media site that you go to, your email provider, what kind of emails you are putting through Gmail, what kind of searches you are putting through Google. You can make small changes. You can do this step by step and create habits in this regard in chunks. So I'll give you one example for myself. The first, I've ditched Gmail and I've set up a fast mail. I think that's exactly in Australia, and I have to. It's on my to-do list to review that because of data retention specifically. But again, I have my own email account on a server that I trust, and it doesn't go through like Gmail's all this filtering and all this data collection. But that's just one step. But it's a big step, and you have to make efforts, and you have to take it step by step. Another example is, so for example, if you have DuckDuckGo installed in your Firefox, for example, you can start using that even if you're not satisfied with all the search results. Maybe just start using it for medical queries, for example. And then you can gradually just move on and do more and more things that just like helps you shift all this information given to the corporations that don't care about your privacy to the ones that do. That's what I would recommend. That going into this browser fingerprinting, it just really does the part where you might not be able to stop that, and that's fine. So don't get disheartened. That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think privacy is a process, and it's an ongoing process. No one ever really has perfect privacy, and it's all down to again, your threat model. And as I think it's Matt Odell has said many, many times, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you can make small improvements, I like that, I think that's the way to go. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and go into why iVPN stands out, or why people should trust iVPN, I guess. What sort of what criteria or what kind of characteristics do you think iVPN has that makes that a viable thing for people to shift the trust model to?
Sure. Yeah. If you allow me, I will just start with like a larger picture on this. You asked like how do you pick a VPN, or how do you trust? So I usually say to people when I talk to them at conferences and when I have conversations in different communities, they ask me about specific services. What do you think about this service? What do you think about that service? I'm really honest about saying that iVPN might not be the best choice for you. There are a couple of providers, so it's part of my job to like evaluate and vet other services. So I spent a considerable amount of time on this, and there are a handful of services that I would trust or use besides iVPN, but that list is pretty short. So the first consideration for me is definitely the trust. As I said, no matter what kind of use cases you have, what kind of different things that you want to get out of that VPN, you will shift all your traffic to them. It's going to be your ISP essentially, and they are going to be able to see everything that you do to the extent that your ISP can see it. And if they have your payment information, if they have your email address, they can tie that together and again analyze, package, sell it, and do whatever they want with it. So for that reason, the number one consideration is trust. Are the operators of the service? The first question is, do I know who they are? So this thing that the VPN provider ownership for the bigger services now, they are not public. They have like public ownership and they have a public facing team and leadership team. This is kind of a new thing. So if you look up the biggest names, all of them have this now. But a couple of years ago, it was just a random company registered in British Virgin Islands with like, if you looked up the team members, they were using fake names like, I don't know, Joe Tyrell, when they were in fact someone sitting in Lithuania with like a very different name, this was mind-boggling for me. I was writing blog posts about this, calling them out. So the point here is that you need to know who's behind the service. The company is operating it, the leadership team, and then you can evaluate that. Okay, so are these guys trustworthy? Would they actually act in my best interest? That's the number one consideration. And then also like evaluate, does it do what it says on the tin? Will they log my traffic? What kind of policies they have? So the policy aspect is the other part. What kind of privacy policy they have? What kind of legal guidelines they have? How they are going to respond to different requests for data? Will they comply with these requests? And if they comply, will they have any kind of data on me? So most providers will say that they don't log, but if you dig a little bit deeper into the history or into their privacy policies, there are always like the asterisk is there, the caveats are there. Yeah. So I would definitely look at these policies and then go on and see whether they keep the security best practices. This is where it gets a little bit more difficult for like let's say layman or like an average user. You might need to consult experts or different evaluators that you would trust. Whether these companies keep the security best practices, whether they commission and install their servers in a way that follows these best practices, whether they use the latest protocols and the latest encryption mechanisms. So these are the things. These are the main things that I would start with. But we can get into some of these caveats a little bit, policies or audits or the product characteristics if you want.
I think, that's a good criteria for people to come back to as it is to realize, they are trusting the VPN provider to more or less be in that place of where the ISP was. And people who have listened to me enough will know that this is my general criteria for probably pretty much most applications that I use. But I normally say, like, is it open source? So can you view the source, or can, in an adversarial environment, other people view the source? Because not everyone's a coder that can do a source review. But at the same time, if it's open source, a lot of your competitors, a lot of your adversaries would be looking at that. So an issue will float to the top. No logging policies, you mentioned, having regular audits of those policies and the open source code itself. You mentioned things like how VPN providers will respond to, say, a court order or a request for information. And so I guess to me, one of the criteria that I come back to is like, is the VPN situated in a privacy-friendly jurisdiction? And also, what's the established history in terms of how they've dealt with those things in the past? Stuff that we've talked about a little bit earlier in this episode even is having a clear profit model. So like, how is the VPN profiting? Because if it's unclear, then it's quite likely they're profiting off of your own data, or they're profiting off of government subsidies to get your own data. So it kind of needs to be clear in that regard.
Yeah,
Things like
excellent
honest
points.
advertising, helpful guides, and there's probably all the basic stuff like device compatibility. If someone's using Windows and
Yeah,
the VPN's not allowable on Windows, then they're obviously not going to use that, or if Android, etc. So it needs to be sort of usable in that regard. But those are kind of the main ones that I come back to. I think you brought
yeah,
up a really
yeah.
good point about the technical implementation, because something that is getting a bit kind of into the weeds for people that might not be as aware technically is that, yeah, you might go to a VPN provider and they have servers all around the world, but have they actually got kind of ownership and installed and maintain those servers themselves, or do they rely on someone else to do that? Because then technically you're bringing that someone else into the trust model as well. So those are, yeah, all very good points, I think, in terms of choosing what is, yeah, the most trustworthy VPN provider.
Yeah, yeah. Just to expand a little bit on these points. Yeah, excellent,
Hmm.
excellent summary. So yeah, first on the open source. Yeah, so IVPN specifically we have open source apps, but with the open source you can go a little bit deeper. So open sourcing infrastructure, and there are different new initiatives in this regard where you can give a little bit more opportunity for evaluators, analysts, auditors, to peer into your systems and verify that actually what you say is true. So I think the open source part, it's a good point, and just want to add here that really there's no way for VPN services right now. There's no technical or other way for VPN services to give you 100% assurance or 100% verification that what they do is actually what they say is actually what they do. So this is just not possible. So what good VPN services can do, and this is what iVPN focuses on pretty much in most of our efforts in regards to communications and transparency and let's say marketing, is that we can give you these different points, these different trust points, and add to them, to the extent that it's possible. So if you just take a checklist like that and you say, okay, so audit, yeah, check. Open source apps, yeah, check. And you, so that increases your trust level, and it provides more and more assurance that it's a VPN provider that you can trust. But that's just a certain extent that you can go to. So this is where you might encounter articles saying that don't use VPNs, don't use commercial VPN services for privacy, and if you just boil down to the gist of it, this is exactly this point, because there's no way that you can 100% trust them. So some people might not get to a point where they can comfortably trust a VPN service. Then I would suggest that they shouldn't use a VPN service. So not everyone needs a VPN. So people might not care about the ISP logging them. The people might not care about their all this, like this nothing to hide argument. It's, as you said, it's not really good. But if you want to stick to it and you say that, okay, I absolutely don't care about any of that stuff, then you don't need a VPN. You don't need a VPN, just because an advertisement said that if you don't use a VPN, your credit card data will be stolen if you go onto the internet. That's not true. So my point here is that the first question is: do you need a VPN? Is it part of the toolkit that you need? Yes. Can you trust a VPN more than your ISP? Yes. And VPN providers can go to this extent if you do a good job to increasing that trust and earning that trust. So yeah, open source is a very good point. And audits. Yeah, one point I wanted to say about the audits, that I think it's very important that a couple of points: who is doing the audit, whether the one that is commissioned, like the company or the team is doing that audit, is trustworthy in itself. That's one important consideration. What's the scope of the audit? So what that audit is actually entails and inspects, for the provider. And the last important point, which we always usually stress, is that an audit is just a snapshot in time. So if you can say that, at that point where these systems were inspected, we found no evidence of logging, for example. But there is no assurance that that's the exact code and that's going to be the exact setup and infrastructure setup that's going to be live on the VPN server the next day. So what I'm saying is that if the provider is inherently untrustworthy, they can manufacture even like an audit scenario where they just turn on logging the next day. You have to keep this in mind. So it's also not something that's like, oh, the provider has an audit. That's okay. That's immediately trustworthy now. So yeah, that's the second point I wanted to add. And the third point was about jurisdictions, which is also very important and very tricky. So I think one consideration there. So I think there is an inherent trade-off there. So if the provider is in a jurisdiction where it's very obscure, so for example, let's say British Virgin Islands, where the laws are very laissez-faire, they have no like data retention policies, or they have ways to help providers or a VPN service in a way that's actually beneficial to the user. That's great. But on the other hand, this also comes with obfuscation for ownership, obfuscation for the company. So I think the trade-off there is that on the one hand, you want a transparent ownership in a jurisdiction where there is, for example, if there is big damage done, you might be able to hold them accountable. But on the other hand, it should be a jurisdiction where the data protection laws and the independence of the jurisdiction is great enough, so they can still run a VPN service in a way that allows them to not have data retention. There is no immediate and very evident collaboration between the data centers and the government agencies, for example. So yeah, so that's very important. But the other caveat there is like the servers will be in different jurisdictions. So even if the provider is registered in Switzerland, for example, if they have a server in a jurisdiction like India, if they have like strong data retention laws and they compel even VPN providers and data centers to log everything and have these logs in clear text, be present at request, then it's the VPN provider's jurisdiction won't save you because they will have to log. So yeah. These were just caveats I wanted to add to the jurisdiction question. Yeah.
It's I'll throw something in there. I won't name it specifically, but when you mentioned British Virgin Islands and Lithuania and data mining and that kind of thing, I think I know exactly the VPN you're talking about. I'm not gonna say it and then have it associated with you. I think I'll put it in the show notes later because that's a VPN I used to use a long time ago, and I went down that rabbit hole myself and thought too many things kind of line up for this to be just a conspiracy. But that's just a little aside. I just kind of when you mentioned that again, I thought I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, it wasn't a coincidence, and but I don't want to mention them either.
No, that's okay. I won't bring it up now. But I did have a question because you mentioned India and you mentioned again like the jurisdiction where the company is set up in isn't always the be all end all, especially if the infrastructure is in another location and that location actually has very strong laws. So like with this recent law that I don't know if it's actually been passed yet, but India is essentially saying that I think VPN, VPS providers need to keep data logs for the next for 5 years, basically on every customer, like personal ID, etc. How, is there a way around that? Or is it pretty much just any VPN that has a server in India essentially needs to abide by those laws?
I haven't looked deeply into that. So again, this with a pinch of salt. We might be able to support this with some links. But I think India has a new law. It's passed already. All VPNs, so they specifically name VPNs and that kind of model that they have to collect and store customer data for at least 5 years. So I'm not exactly sure about all the caveats, but I think it's so they can reach out to the ISP and the data center to get those logs.
Gotcha. And I've never actually used a server from India on iVPN, so I'm not sure if you even have a server in in India. But do you or you don't?
No. Yeah, we didn't have one earlier, and we don't have one now. So yeah, we contemplated it, and we had some requests for it, but now it's completely out of the question. So yeah,
I can understand that exactly. Any final points in terms of choosing a VPN provider, or maybe some of the criteria we've already talked about?
Yeah, just going a little bit deeper into the ethical considerations. Again, I mean, if we talk about trust, how to evaluate if someone is really in this game for your protection and protecting your privacy. So we are a business. We don't have problem with the model of setting up a business with a mission and with a cause where you provide a service to help that cause and you charge money for it. I think it's a very clear way of and then using those profits, to improve the service and maybe sponsor educational materials, giving that to nonprofit organizations, and grow your business, grow your team, and try to have a larger impact. So I think this is all fair. This is all fair game. But I think the issue is when certain providers, big providers, definitely do this. They start to oversell the capabilities. They start to oversell their servers. So not just that the quality of service might degrade, but they also try to convince everyone to use it. So everyone needs it. I don't know, a grandma who goes on the internet once a month in rural Nebraska needs a VPN, or someone who uses their phone on a subway to buy something online needs a VPN. This is just like atrocious. But so my point here is that some providers do this with a clear mission, and they are in this game for very good reasons, to improve the state of things and to make a difference primarily. And some providers are primarily this to make a buck, either make a quick buck or make the big bucks. So like one of the providers was sold for $1 billion recently. And now there's a big conglomerate in the VPN space that owns like 5 VPNs, or maybe even more. Amongst them, like the 2 of them are in the top 5, and they are listed on the London Stock Exchange. They have big shareholders. They have shareholder meetings. So it just shows that, which are public, by the way, and then you can look into it. It's very enlightening. It just shows like how they talk about these things. It's mainly about the bottom line. It's mainly about all the considerations on how to grow the business, how to acquire more businesses, and it just gets more centralized. It just gets focused on increasing these. So the point here is these owners and these providers will use all these things that I've talked about earlier, about third-party trackers, Google Analytics, sponsoring YouTubers, I don't know, who talk about salt drinks, to best VPN. Our VPN is the best VPN because of these reasons, and you should check them out. And here is a promo code. So these guys have no business in evaluating VPNs and recommending VPNs, and they are harming their viewers in this sense, because they have no idea what's happening, behind the scenes there. Yeah. So and some other stuff like dark patterns. This is also like a pet peeve of mine. Like these countdown timers and making it hard to cancel the subscriptions. So these are just small signals, but you can evaluate. If you evaluate VPNs, if you go on their website and you check these policies and check how they do all these things, these are all small things that really add up. And if you counter them, the best providers, I have three to 5 on my list. They will do either none of those things or very, very little of these things, and that's telling. And this is why if you go on like independent websites, independent evaluator sites, there are a couple who don't use affiliate links and really know their business. They usually end up with the same 3 to 5 recommendations on the top, and that's not a coincidence. But if you go on the best VPN results in Google, they will have all the big guys there.
That's right.
Are really sponsoring them and like giving them $100 per new user acquired, but so they will do all these things that I've been talking about, and that's how you can separate the wheat from the chaff.
I think you have to really read between the lines with a lot of these things, don't you? And again, look at established history, look at who the shareholders and stakeholders are, that profit model. I'm curious, will you disclose your 3 to 5 top, or maybe even just your top 3 VPNs? I mean, I can mention. Sure. I'm just curious if we've come to maybe a similar conclusion or not. So Mulvad is one of the ones that I would recommend. iVPN obviously is the one that I recommend as well. The next one, I'm not sure about. I'm starting to rethink it, and I get a lot of tinfoil hat speculation from people, but Proton VPN is another one that I would consider trustworthy. And that's pretty much my three. I wouldn't really go any further than that by recommending any others. There could be others out there, but those three seem to be, the most viable. So I haven't really seen any reason to go beyond it. But I'm curious, how do those three sit with you?
Sure.
Obviously, iVPN's probably the gimme, but yeah.
I need to. I mean, I haven't talked to any lawyers about this, but I really need to be. I really need to preface this. So this is not a recommendation.
Yes. Yeah. Correct.
And let's frame it this way. If you would come to me and ask about okay, so Victor, I'm using this provider. Shall I ditch them because they are probably untrustworthy by your judgment? I would say no. You should keep them. I think they are okay. So yeah, my list would be definitely Mulvad, number one. We have some relationship with them, but just generally about talking about improving the VPN ecosystem and ethics and trust. And I know their service very well. I think that their service is the closest to ours. There are some differences. There are things that we do better, but they do a very good job. So yeah, that would be number one on my list if I weren't using or working on iVPN. Proton. I know that some people have some issues with how they handle some of the recent investigations,
email logging and IP.
IP logging, because I think the thing there is that the mail service by law has to employ a logging that is less lenient, let's say, than the VPN side. So, but the VPN doesn't need to keep logs. That's as far as I can remember the story. So personally.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think with the Proton mail thing, I don't want to just defend them, but at the same time, I feel like they had a policy that was pretty clear about that, and they stuck to the policy. And then people, I think, maybe misinterpreted the policy and said, I didn't think they were allowed to do that, but it was pretty clear in their policy. So I think that's just a bit of a caveat around that. If anyone's seen that and decided, they're untrustworthy. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably also a policy that would apply to any service in the EU specifically or in Switzerland. So there's no way around it. The only way around it is, which I mentioned, this trade-off that you just move your jurisdiction, you obfuscate the owners, and you just go offshore totally. But then that trust factor for the customer will be lost. So it's a tricky trade-off. But just to answer your question, so I wouldn't ditch Proton if someone would ask me. I don't. I think they're doing a good job from what I can tell from their background. They're solid. I wouldn't endorse them, but yeah. And the fourth one, which is also there are two on my list, which I think they are doing the right things, but it gets a little bit tricky. Is TunnelBear and Windscribe. So I said my job is to understand and see what other VPN providers are doing and just see their policies and what they do. So these kind of litmus tests, so these kind of quick tests that I've been talking about in regards to trackers, third-party tools, where they advertise, ethical considerations, affiliate programs, honest reviews. Windscribe and TunnelBear are the two that tick most of these boxes. They don't do so. They refuse to do these kind of tactics. Most of them. Which is a good sign for me. They also TunnelBear has audits, regular audits. Windscribe is working on an audit. Where it gets a little bit tricky is the jurisdiction. So TunnelBear is a U.S. jurisdiction and it's owned by McAfee. And Windscribe is in the Canadian jurisdiction. So we can get into a little bit like this Five Eyes and different eyes thing, which we believe it's a little bit overplayed. But if you are not comfortable with the provider in the jurisdiction, Canadian jurisdiction, US jurisdiction, then it's just going to immediately fail your test. So yeah, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. But the rest, there are smaller providers which could be good. So I'm not saying that all the rest is junk, but most of the bigger providers, most visible providers, all of them had at least one or more red flags for me. So yeah.
That makes sense, and I appreciate that as well, because I put you in a tricky position to get you to, spruik other people, spruik other businesses, but also, not recommendations, no legal ramifications. So I think it's just good to discuss and share notes on that kind of thing. Two sort of final topics, I guess, would be any future iVPN products or services that we haven't talked about that you might want to mention. And then maybe we can do like a summary of what Bitcoiners might get out of something like a VPN specifically. But yeah, maybe if we start at iVPN, if there's anything coming up in future that you wanted to spruik.
Yeah, I mean, I would just start with like a current one, which is I think is interesting and could be useful to mention, and what separates us, not specifically from let's say mobile, but from most of the providers. We had this functionality for a long time now, and we are working on improving it constantly. It's multi-hop. So this is where, if you're a little bit more paranoid about data centers and jurisdictions, you can use iVPN's multi-hop, specifically with WireGuard as well, which is a new protocol and really fast protocol. So what multi-hop does is you enter your traffic to one server in one jurisdiction, one VPN server, and it exits. It jumps through another server, gets encrypted again, and then it exits through another server, perhaps in a different data center owned by a different company in a different jurisdiction. So what it helps you against is, let's say, a malicious data center or a data center where they are incentivized, to monitor the traffic coming in and going out. So by default, a data center can't see what's happening in the VPN server. It's encrypted, so they receive the encrypted traffic, but when it exits the VPN server, it exits unencrypted. And this, I'm not going to go into the technical things here, but it allows for some sort of complex attacks against VPN users, where they could correlate some of the traffic, some of the requests, and identify some of these requests. So these are timely and costly. So most data centers are not, incentivized to do this. But if they were to work together, for example, with like a government agency, very resource agency, it will be possible. It's very hard to tell to what extent this is a problem. We are working on, trying to get the latest information about this and see. So this is not part of the general mass surveillance threat model. So I'm not saying that every iVPN user should use this, but if you are concerned about these issues, then you can use multi-hop to get another layer of encryption and pass that data along to data centers in two jurisdictions. And if you do that, this kind of correlation attacks and this kind of analysis becomes extremely
very
hard.
difficult.
So,
yeah,
very difficult. So yeah, this is what I would really highlight as like very important aspect for iVPN. And yeah, another thing is, which we are going to improve on and plan to improve on, is our anti-tracker. So we talked about trackers and the different ways that third parties trying to track you across different websites, and like employ requests, and employ different tools to track you. So iVPN has a functionality called anti-tracker, which if you enable it in the apps, we use like a specially configured DNS server to block all the requests from a long list of domains that might track you. And one interesting thing here is so-called hardcore mode, which blocks Google and Facebook ASNs, all their IPs, and so all the requests coming from them. So if you use that, you can be fairly sure that Facebook and Google won't see any of the stuff that you do. But it comes very, very important note that it will break a lot of sites.
I was about to say, usually the better your privacy is with those sort of things, if you turn off like JavaScript or cookies or tracking, it means a lot of stuff doesn't work quite properly, but exactly. you gain a lot of privacy from it.
Yeah, exactly. But this is also an important, like a very interesting test. So if you use iVPN, you enable hardcore mode, and if you just go around and start browsing on your regular browsing journey, you will just be amazed by how much stuff doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, it shows that it relies on Google or it relies on Facebook. So yeah, so we would again, with this roadmap thing and what we are working on, this is just again like an asterisk there that no promises there. This is like a rough roadmap for the next 6 months, a year. But yeah, I would like to improve the anti-tracker, maybe with some sort of like customization, maybe improve this hardcore more as well. So that's one thing. The other thing we would like to focus on is infrastructure improvements. So have more servers, our own servers in more locations. There are some things. There's one thing that could be interesting for more technical inclined users to look into. It's called initiative called System Transparency. It's an initiative by Movat, some of our competitors, but we are really interested in supporting this and experimenting with it. And that's a idea, very, very ambitious, where essentially the short story is, if it comes together, any kind of evaluators, anyone could evaluate servers and what is running live on the VPN server, the code running on the server, and audit that server in a way that gives you like fairly good assurances that there is no logging going on. So it's a complex idea, and I'm not gonna get into the.
I think conceptually that's a good summary, and that's not even something that I've heard of. That sounds really cool, and not surprising. It's coming from a Molvad, and that you guys are interested in it as well.
So we would like to experiment with that as well. So another thing that we're going to focus on a little bit more, I think we touched on this topic, is about the obfuscation and anti-censorship capabilities. There are new interesting projects coming out here. So Torres uses one called Snowflake, which is a pluggable transport, and that's like acts as some sort of a proxy and helps people get around censorship. That uses deep packet inspection by masking the traffic as harmless, let's say, like WebRTC, using these proxies to connect to. So there are different very interesting new developments in this area that we would like to deploy if it makes sense. And lastly, mainly around my work, more guides, guide updates is definitely in order. You mentioned our advanced privacy guides; they're somewhat out of date. So, but if you allow me some sort of an ad for this, that we are looking for writers or a writer who would be happy to work on this with us, because we have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of knowledge in this area. But we have limited resources, so somehow it always gets bumped down on our roadmap, which I'm really disappointed by. So if someone listening and wants have like the technical background and wants to work on this with us, I would be happy to get their contacts. So
that's and you can definitely do that. I'll even perhaps put that in the post when I post it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's great.
All right. And one interesting thing we are working on the documentation side is a very comprehensive threat modeling document for iVPN, where we detail the threat model of the service, what kind of threats it's designed to mitigate against, what kind of actors and threats it's not designed against. So if you go through that document, it will give you a very good idea of whether iVPN fits your threat model, and whether it's something that will help you. So I'm very excited about that. It should be out. I'm not gonna say when, because that's
just say soon.
Puts you in a tricky position. Soon, soon. Yeah. Hopefully very soon. Coming to a feed near you. So that's about it.
That's great. I think, more education, the working on multi-hop servers, greater support for that, trying to again circumvent things like cookie tracking with the the anti-tracker and the hardcore mode, and sort of bolstering that a little bit more. And like you said, even trying to work around censorship of I guess people using VPNs in the first place, or some of the deep packet inspection that can occur with both Tor and VPN. So those are all like very, very useful things to sort of push both iVPN and kind of this industry forward. And I love the idea of doing the more in-depth and quite specific threat modeling guide, because it's so difficult to come across something that is a good one-stop shop for that. And it's kind of like it is true, like threat modeling is very important, but I feel like I cop out sometimes when people say like, oh, what should I do for my privacy? And often enough, after a very, very long discussion and that starts to become confusing or maybe go in circles, I kind of have to fall back to saying, like, you sort of need to determine what's your threat model. Like, who are you trying to keep private from? Because that's very, very important. But then finding a great guide, to sort of step them through that process, or being able to do that myself, it's very difficult, basically. So I think having more resources around that entire concept, and maybe more of a systematic way of going through it, or even just saying this is the threat model that iVPN in particular prevents against, and that will at least get people thinking in the right ways about it. So I think that's really great. All of those things, really.
Yeah. We haven't. So we are starting with the iVPN threat model, but I think I've seen the same thing about the general threat modeling concepts. There's no good one comprehensive tool or guide for this. There are some that work. I think EFF has one, like this SSD, surveillance self-defense, and some others I've seen. I think partly one reason could be that it's a very complex topic. So
Yes.
every threat model will be very different, and there's just so many things that you have to consider and think about. And the other thing is very fast changing. So the threats are changing. There are of course some overall things that don't change. For example, the ISP problem that hasn't really changed the past 10 years. But there's always new capabilities, always new tools to get around those capabilities, and it's just very complex. But one thing I would mention here. I'm not sure about their exact guide for this, but privacy guides. I'm not sure if you know that site.
Yes, I
that
do.
would
Yeah.
be a very good. Yeah, so they have very good tool recommendations for VPNs and for other stuff as well. And I think they're moving into this direction where I think they've already added some knowledge-based documents about threat models, and you can start with that threat modeling, and they have a button down on their website, start your privacy journey, and it starts with explaining threat modeling. So that's the resource I would probably point to if you want to learn more about this.
That's great, yeah, because I hadn't seen that specific guide. Privacy Guides is one of those
new.
websites that I often sort of spruik or say. If someone says, "Oh, I'm looking for a browser or a search engine, which one should I use?" I'll normally suggest a few, then say, "Go have a look at this website." So that's great if they've got that there now as well. That's a good place to sort of funnel people to.
Yep.
I guess we'll jump into the. I don't think this is the only topic that Bitcoiners listen in for in this episode, but it's probably going to be one that they'll listen in closely to. Is what does a VPN provide to Bitcoiners in regards to privacy? And so I know that you're not as deep into Bitcoin as say myself. So maybe I'll kind of lead some of the topics, and then perhaps you could qualify statements, or if I've kind of mixed something up, you can feel free to correct, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
I think
that's it.
Probably the most common thing that I see happen, especially with new Bitcoiners, is they'll check things like an address for Bitcoin that they've received on a public block explorer. Now, for the most part, you can check your wallet for that, and that's like another little tangent in terms of like where does that wallet connect. So maybe I'll just leave that to one side. But let's just go with the block explorer as an example, because most people just kind of inherently trust those websites. So whether it's mempool.space, I think that's probably the best one to use, and probably the most trustworthy one, or like blockchair.com or .org. Like there's a lot of different public block explorers. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that if every time they go to check an address on the block explorer, and that block explorer sees that it's always coming from the same IP address, there is a very good likelihood that they can cluster those queries together and say, okay, this one IP address has checked these 10 addresses in the last week or two. There's probably a high probability that these 10 addresses belong to that person, or it belongs to someone that they're associated with. Now, we could come up with all sorts of advanced ways of saying, well, use a different IP address every time, or use a different, browser to circumvent the fingerprinting, or use Tor instead, because it kind of does both of those things. I would say, generally speaking, probably the best approach is just to run your own node, because then when you're connecting to your own node, you can query the data from your own node rather than someone else's. But at the same time, if you do want to at least obfuscate specifically who you are, using a VPN to check a public block explorer would be better than, say, using your ISP IP address, because that one is tied very much to things like your geolocation and is much more identifying in that way. But again, like knowing the ideal is run your own node, query your balances, query your addresses from your own node. But if you can't, or you don't want to for some reason, then generally speaking, I would say, using a VPN, maybe even better yet in this scenario, using something like Tor or even just the Tor browser. Because that's something that I see like a lot of newbies kind of making the mistake on and not realizing the that kind of clustering that can happen with addresses.
Yeah, I agree with that. For me, this is ties really well into this whole question of different pieces of personally identifiable information collated together, maybe by different parties, and then used for analysis and de-anonymization and just getting information on you. So so if you use your IP used by your ISP, and then you have someone getting that data from the block explorer, then you can use all these pieces of information put together, and they have a complete profile of you. And you can use this probabilistic approach to say that, okay, so now we know all this about this specific person, starting with their name and address and everything else, and they probably own these wallets. So not getting into like who those adversaries might be, you can have some guesses, but it gets pretty easy. So yeah, this is just like a very basic measure that you can take. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Now, probably what feels like the most logical step is to go into people that are using, say, a wallet that's custodial and not using a block explorer. And so they say, well, I never go onto a block explorer to check my balances. I just do that on my wallet. But they don't have their wallet connected to their own node. And so in that circumstance, it's pretty much a parallel or an equivalent where the custodial provider of that wallet, so, some that people might be aware of are things like maybe Blue Wallet or Breeze or Phoenix Wallet. These providers are essentially able to see, well, your balance. A lot of them might get information like your extended public key, which actually tells them every single address you could ever derive, from your private key or your seed words. And they get things like your IP address. So obviously that's not ideal. And again, probably the ideal would be to run your own node and connect your wallet to your own node. Therefore, you're pretty much just trusting yourself. However, I would say if you are going to use a custodial wallet, is be mindful that you are leaking things like your IP address, your Bitcoin balances, and perhaps every receiving address you might ever create. And although you can't kind of stop all of that information leaking, I see a very good piece of information to stop leaking would be your actual IP address. So therefore, it's not clear where your geolocation is. And the easiest way of doing something like that would be just to use a VPN when you're accessing your wallet software. If you can, use something like Tor as well. But for new users, using Tor seems to be that extra step in terms of difficulty. So a VPN I would see as like a low-hanging fruit to say, you are leaking some information to that custodial provider. If you feel that they're trustworthy enough, that's maybe an okay step to take, and if it fits your threat model. But perhaps you just want to provide some protection over your actual geolocation leaked by your IP address by using a VPN instead.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if I would have to choose, I would go with Tor as well. But if you are, let's say, like a regular user, air quotes, then you would, and you use your wallet regularly, for example, and you just don't want to like go through that hassle every time, or you just like maybe it will prompt you to just like forget about it if it's too complex. Maybe for like this regular use, it's much more viable just to have like an always on VPN that will give you the privacy benefits also that we've talked about, but also you don't have to think about this particular issue when accessing the custodial wallet. So yeah,
that's right. And I guess sort of a natural extension from there is that if users are running their own node, generally speaking, I would suggest people run their node over Tor. But at the same time, for new users, that can sometimes be like a non-trivial thing to do, in which case I would suggest, run your node over a VPN. Unless you have no care in the world about your ISP knowing that you're running a node. And at the moment, running a Bitcoin node in Australia is completely legal. And in my, understanding is not a red flag whatsoever, but you never know about these things in future. And especially if some of the Bitcoin hypothesis about financial collapses and so forth is, comes to fruition, I feel like maybe Bitcoiners might have a bit of a target on their back. So there are some that might want to not have their ISP knowing that they're running a Bitcoin node, in which case a VPN would be a good option. But if they don't even want the VPN knowing, then, perhaps doing something like running your node over Tor would be a good option as well.
Yeah, and it's also ties back into this question of like your ISP has the most information by default on most people because of their very important position in the whole network. And this is where, if there is some censorship attempts, or there is some websites that the government wants to block, completely, or they want information on different people, this is where they go to. That's the first destination.
Mm.
So if you extrapolate that and you just think about these kind of scenarios, if you are a government entity saying, okay, so how can we get the quickest list of all the people who are associated with Bitcoin heavily, then yeah, that would be on definitely on top of the list, or like very in a very prominent place. Let's talk to the ISPs and see what information they can give us. So yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
I'm also just thinking, for anyone listening who's outside of Australia, some people might think, well, I'd love to run my node over Tor, but Tor is blocked in my country. There are bridges that you can use to be able to still connect to
Yep.
Tor and obfuscate that. For anyone who's maybe not up to scratch with doing that, you can actually still run a VPN and Tor. I can't remember the
Yep.
terminology, whether it's Tor over VPN or VPN over Tor, but essentially you connect to your VPN first, and then you connect to Tor. What your ISP sees is you connecting to a VPN, and your VPN sees you're connecting to Tor, which means your traffic is kind of hidden from the VPN, and your traffic is also hidden from the ISP, at least in terms of
Yep.
what it is and what it's connected to.
Yeah, so it's for if you have issues connecting to Tor, and you want to use a VPN for that, then you first connect to the VPN and then to Tor. Yeah, but there's this is also a very contested topic, because those who say if you want to use Tor for privacy and for anonymity, if you use a VPN first, that's first connect to the VPN. That's another risk factor that you introduce to your whole model. So
That's right.
because then it goes to the VPN as well. So, but if you trust the VPN provider, then yeah, that's good. I think Tor over VPN. So yeah, that's something that's discouraged for different reasons. But
That's
yeah,
my understanding. And that what that would be is that you connect to Tor first, and then you come out of Tor going through the VPN versus the other way around. But anyway,
yeah,
I think for probably most people listening, that's not going to be too highly relevant. I guess it's just if you have someone's in a country
yeah,
where they can't use Tor, know that there is actually a
yeah.
solution within Tor for that, which is a Tor bridge. And if that seems sort of like too far out of reach technically, then yeah, knowing that you can start your VPN first and then connect through Tor, and
Yep.
that is providing a sort of a similar level. But again, there's no perfect solution here. It really depends on your threat model and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Another scenario that might come up with nodes as well is that if you are away from home and you are looking to either access your node because you're checking your wallet balances, or you're actually sending a transaction or something along those lines, is that your connection back to your node could be something that is monitored by either like your mobile network provider if you're doing it on your phone, or if you're using public Wi-Fi or something along those lines. So similar to what we talked about in the past, like to circumvent an attack like that or a surveillance like that, is having a VPN that you log into, and then you're really only connecting back to your own node. So yeah, I don't know if the necessity for something like Tor in that circumstance is really there, but having a VPN at least to know that you're not being monitored on a public network, or that your mobile provider is not seeing that you're connecting back to like a Bitcoin node, that could be something for people to keep in mind as well when they're out and about.
Yeah. This is something that I don't have anything to add to.
That's okay. Yeah, I know.
I think it was spot on.
Now, I think it's the final point is Bitcoin miners. So most people are, if they're into mining, they're either doing hosted mining. There could be a part of an institution and at that level, and in both of those cases, this doesn't really apply. But there are a lot of people who are getting more into home mining, where they have their miner situated at home. They have it pointing at like a mining pool. But the thing is, they're still connecting to their modem. So they're still connecting to, say their ISP, and their ISP can see things like that data that's being transferred, and it has a bit of a profile. So it's obvious that you might be doing something like Bitcoin mining, and maybe even which pool that you're connected to in terms of like the Bitcoin mining pool. And so again, a VPN can provide some level of privacy over the top of that. I think sometimes Bitcoin miners have a concern that there's going to be a latency issue, although I've from my research into it and talking to quite a lot of Bitcoin home miners, that doesn't seem to be the case. Any sort of latency issue is relatively insignificant. And if it gains you a level of privacy from your ISP that you'd prefer to have with something like Bitcoin mining, then it could be something that fits into your threat model to have a VPN that you kind of tunnel that traffic through.
Yeah, definitely. And that's again with there's a kind of like a common thread here with the custodial wallets and the mining pools and the ISP. Just like every time you to do any kind of activity like that, you have to think about the other party and where and who can see that information and who can do anything harmful with that information. I'm not saying that this will definitely happen. But this type of protection, and in this case specifically what a VPN provides, is just like assurance. It's just it's an assurance against any kind of like future issues that could have been prevented. Yeah, the tricky thing about this, and just like an overall philosophical musing about this, is that with privacy, it's very hard to convince people to consider these issues because the potential outcomes are really hard to define, and the chances are probably low. But these very low chance but high risk outcomes, if those happen, then you will understand, and you will face a situation where like, oh, now I get it. And this is why that people have went through situations like this with identity theft or getting burnt with some sort of information leaking and having really adverse effects. That's when people start to wake up to it, and those people become like the really big and fervent privacy advocates. That's my experience, at least.
What's the phrase? It's like, when you need privacy, it's a luxury that you can't afford. So it's something that you should sort of chip away at now. Don't wait until you need it, because once you need it, it's far too late for that. Once the information is out there, especially on things like the internet or an adversary, it's there forever, and it's very easy to use that to sort of piece together profiles and whatever else. So I think
good point.
That's probably a good point to sort of cap off on is, again, consider your threat model, consider what you're trying to protect from. Don't get too overwhelmed by it. It is overwhelming, admittedly, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be your approach. Like, doing things gradually. Again, that idea of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Chip away at it, because any small improvement you make is I would say a significant improvement over time.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, just my closing thoughts is just really pick a VPN provider that you can trust. Take the time to vet it and test it. For the fit and the speeds. That's also important. We haven't talked about this too much because that's just easier to evaluate. But yeah, if you take the time and put the research in, then you will be able to find a provider that's trustworthy and that's a good fit for you, and then you can keep using them for years, hopefully. But yeah, that's the most important takeaway I would stress here.
Absolutely. I think we've given a lot of like decent criteria for people to use to either see if something seems trustworthy or if it's a bit of a red flag. And I would say to people to use their, I guess for lack of a better phrase, like webs of trust, like the people that you trust that seem to know about these things, what do they tend to say? And if they all tend to triangulate back to a few different providers, which I believe for the most part they do, that is another level of, not really a guarantee, but some level of reassurance that you're making probably the most informed and likely good decision.
Yep. Yeah, good points.
Any final points before we finish off, or anything that you thought we were going to talk about that we didn't get around to?
Yeah, I think we touched on most things. So yeah, that's it.
No, that's good. Thank you so much for your time, Victor. And
yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Really enjoyed our conversation.
No problem at all. Now, can people follow you specifically anywhere, or is it more so just the iVPN, the main kind of handle that people should check out?
Yeah, I have a Twitter account, but I'm not really active on there, so probably not that interesting. Yeah, I would suggest following iVPN for VPN related news and specifically about our service. Yeah, we are on Twitter, Reddit, Mastodon, and yeah, we have a blog which we update regularly with product updates, but also with like educational stuff as well. So. Yeah, that's what I would do if you're interested. Yeah, and the final thing is that if people want to, learn more about the service or have any questions about privacy or about the threat model or like how specifically iVPN fits into it, they can contact me directly. My email is victor at ivpn.net. It's Victor with a K. And also, I usually offer people a chance to test our service. So I'm happy to share gift codes, vouchers for a 2 weeks test. So they will have an opportunity to test our service and see if it's a good fit for them. So yeah,
I think that's
those would be my
great.
final notes.
And I appreciate that as well. And I'd encourage people to check that out if they haven't checked out iVPN already.
Right.
Again, Victor, thank you so much for your time. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone for
Justin.
listening. And until next time.